Hey, today we're gonna be checking out a common problem with Gen 1's control packs mostly, but it can happen to a Gen 1 since they're getting older. It's a random stall at idle. Just you'll be sitting there and all of a sudden the car will just shut off, like no explicit reason, no surging, no nothing, just a stall. Okay, generally it's a voltage related issue and we can data log it and you can isolate it. What it comes down to is the cooling fan kicking on high and not kicking on low first. In a control pack, that's how they're wired, and it really sucks. You get a big cooling fan for this thing, and the control pack just sends a signal for turn on. You got it wired to the battery, and boom, you get a voltage drop. Stalls the car. On the Gen 1 general factory cars, you're supposed to have a high speed, low speed. So you have low speed kicking on first, about 50% voltage, and speed on the fan, and then as temperature increases it'll kick up to high if it needs to. But when the low speed relay takes a shit, or sometimes the wiring melts at the connector, it'll just only kick on high. So when the temperature reaches 212, whatever is in your tune to kick it on, it pulls like 90 amps 100 amps from the alternator, which is more than the alternators can push out at idle, dips into the battery voltage, and the ECU just shuts off and stalls. Okay, so I've got a data log here. I'm going to show you exactly what to look for. This is indicative of a stalling behavior. So in yellow here is idle, or RPM. I'm going to zoom in here, and I blip the throttle right there, and then right there. Let it come down. It's stabilizing at 850, and then blip the throttle again. I'm like, okay, nothing's going on. It's not stalling. And then this red line is voltage. Okay, so I've got it programmed pretty high idle voltage. We do that to help this situation. Okay, and then boom, the cooling fan kicks on right there. Idle drops to 450, and the voltage drops to 12.7. Puts a huge draw on the system. Now on this control pack car, there's another issue that we see common. Once the fans kick on, we see the fuel trims go out of whack. Okay, so this was in the middle of tuning. We got fuel trims back here, about 20% off, whatever. Stabilizing at about 14-15% when the O2s warm up. Okay, once the fan kicks on, check out these trims. 41%. Okay, that's bad, and that's fan wash. We call it fan wash. It's again the cooling fan kicking on high and blowing a bunch of air across the mass airflow or the air filter. And what that does is it skews the mass airflow data. So if I clicked here in Maf frequency, okay, we have over here when the fan's off, it's a stable frequency, 1.47, pretty smooth. Over here, once the fan kicks on, we've got erratic Maf frequency, okay? So it's actually lower. It's blowing airflow essentially away from the sensor. It's not like it's blowing air into the Maf, it's kind of blowing the air across the air filter, causing a poor signal draw. It's just a poor signal, okay? It gets worse with the larger the cold air you have. And this is another problem on a control pack. If the air filter is exposed to outside air when it's driving, like the front grille or the headlight or whatever, you put the air filter in a spot where we get it where on an old school, they'll put the filter in the inner fender with no fender well liner. So the filter is sitting right above the tire. Number one, that's gonna put a bunch of shit into your motor, whatever the tire runs over and flings up onto that air filter. These air filters don't really filter that well. They'll filter big chunks out, but they're not gonna filter fine dust and debris. Number two, when that vehicle is traveling at 60, 70, 80 miles an hour, the airflow hitting that tire bounces off of it or pushes off of it, and it creates this turbulent air around the air filter. So these are cars that on the dyno, they're perfect, they never stall. And then you get them on the road and on the freeway, and when they're coming off the freeway, you let off the gas and they just stall. That's because, again, it's Maf Wash. It's airflow across the mass air filter. The mass airflow filter, right? And it causes turbulent air and it causes problems. So you want to get this as smooth as possible. Number one, don't run the control pack, Gen 1 control pack trigger for the fans. It's just a trigger to a relay, right? Run an aftermarket system that has variable speed fan control, where it'll kick on at like 50 or 60%, and then as temperature increases, it ups the speed of the fan to cool off the engine. That's what you want. Those are standalone systems. They run off their own temp sensor. You put it in the radiator, and that'll get the job done. Number two is you got to put an air shield around the air filter. Okay, much like all the cold airs that are for OE, you get a control pack in there, you got to do it. So customers are normally figuring this out the hard way, and they're having to go to just sheet metal. I mean, just a sheet metal piece in there. You can even bolt it to the mass airflow housing itself. It's not too terribly difficult. I just had a customer do it, came out pretty clean. He said it cost him like $15 and an hour's worth of time. That solved the fan wash. And then the variable speed controllers that are out there, they've come a long way since, like 10, 15 years ago. And it looks like they're only like 100 or 200 bucks, 150, whatever. The other option is if you have two fans, you can wire it in so that one fan kicks on low and the other fan kicks on when it's needed for high. That would effectively have half the amperage draw. And it's not that these alternators can't handle the constant draw of a fan. These fans are supposed to pull like 20 amps, most 15 amps. It's the startup current that's required. That massive amount of 80, 90, 100 amps is just to get that fan turning at speed. So when you start it up at a lower speed, the amperage draw is far less, and it doesn't cause a problem with stalling. Because if you lose voltage, like this one here, dropped down to 12.4. If I pull up another spot here, it might have gone down, 12.7 there. But we had 12.4 there, okay? If your battery is in perfect condition, you should have about 12.8 volts. So it's pulling so much amperage off the alternator that it's dipping into the battery voltage. And that's from 14.8 volts all the way down to 12.4. So if you have it programmed, like factory programming is much lower voltage at idle because it shouldn't need it, it can easily stall it. And once it gets into the 11, mid to low 11 range, the ECU will just shut off. It just says, okay, I don't have enough, so it just shuts off and your car stalls, right? So be mindful of that stuff. If it's a factory 11 to 14 Gen 1 car and it just started doing this, don't blame the tune. It's probably not the tune. Check your low speed versus high speed. If your coolant temps are getting up to like 220 or 212, whatever, 220 before the fan kicks on, you got a low speed relay or a wiring issue. Go check it out. And on the control pack, guys, doesn't seem to be a problem with the Gen 2s. The Gen 1s, we see this a lot, although Maf Wash will be a problem with the Gen 2. So be mindful of that system. On a Gen 1, I wouldn't recommend running the factory or the control pack trigger for the fan because it's just a relay. And all it'll do is kick the fan on high, and then absolutely get that Maf filter, the airflow, the cold air filter covered so you're not getting any turbulent air rushing around that causing a problem. Because it's not a tune problem, it's a hardware issue. You got to correct the hardware issue and then the tune will work properly, all right? Cool.